Hello everybody, my name is Terry Waite and I'm speaking to you from the kitchen of my home in the east of England. It's a very old house. It was built around about the 14th century and I've been here in lockdown for the past several weeks, and during that time it's not been too bad for me, although I know it's been very difficult for many people, but it's not been too bad for me because I've had time to read and write and to at least take a break from constant travelling, not just around the UK but around the world. Like you, there'll be no WOMAD. I won't be going to WOMAD this year. There'll be no WOMAD. Let's hope it'll take place next year. But the organisers have asked me if I would make a small contribution via the web, and so here am I to do just that. I thought what I'd do is speak about a couple of books that seem appropriate to this time. The first one is a book I wrote some time ago called Solitude, rather appropriate. That's my old battered copy. And it deals with solitary places and solitary people. I travel around the world and meet people who live in different situations of solitude, some who find it fulfilling, some who find it deeply distressing. And so it's an examination of that. It's not a heavy read, and there are many different characters in there, ranging from people who live out in the outback, miles and miles and miles from anywhere, to people who live in the big city and find that to be a very lonely and isolating place to be. So if you'd like to have a book to read a little bit about other people's experience of solitude, that's the one. But what I'm going to do this morning, more particularly, is talk about another book called Out of the Silence. And again, that's my battered copy, which I've used, as you can see, many, many times in giving addresses in public. It's a book of poetry and reflection, and I found that when I was in captivity all those years ago, I had really an opportunity to reflect and to try and put some of my thoughts down in a concise way, and that led me to writing poetry. Now, I've never been a great fan of poetry, I have to admit it, and certainly never written anything of any significance. But in captivity I started to write poetry in my head, and later on I put some of it down and made some new poems. And I thought I'd just share one or two with you today, and also the reflections that they've engendered. The first one, I'm going to have to look them up as I go along, is about anger. I mean, when I was captured, I was pretty angry, as you can imagine. And I had to do something about it. And here I've written this in the book. This book is not just a book of poems, it's a book of poems and reflections. I've seen many people who've suffered terrible personal tragedy when a child of theirs has been murdered, or they themselves have been victims of a violent attack. They've been understandably angry and have allowed that anger to fester until their own life has been almost totally destroyed. Anger should not be allowed to turn to bitterness, for bitterness is like a cancer that enters the soul. It does more harm to those who hold it than to those against whom it's held. And I wrote a few lines about it. Anger rages like a consuming fire, destroying all that would impede its relentless pathway. Do not extinguish the flames totally, but calm them and warm yourself by the gentle glow of the embers. Well, what I'm really saying is it's a natural force, we all have it. We can never get rid of it completely, but try and turn it and use it constructively. And that's what I attempted to do, with some degree of success, but it wasn't an easy process. Many people think, quite mistakenly, that because I worked for the Archbishop of Canterbury at one time, that I'm a clergyman. Well, I'm not, and never had any vocation in that direction. I do have belief. I suppose some people would say it's not at all orthodox, I believe really that the journey through life is a journey that contains within it a great element of mystery, many things we don't understand and don't know about ourselves and about our purpose for being here. And part of the journey of life is to grow more deeply, if you like, into that mystery which is within and beyond. And religion, I don't like the term religion, being called a religious person, but religion at least provides a framework which should enable you to work towards a deeper understanding of the mystery and a deeper comprehension of it. Many people confuse the framework, the structure, the church, with the essence, and the essence lies beyond that. The framework is merely the handrail to guide you towards that greater mystery. And I wrote something about that called The Kingdom. There is a realm beyond time, immune to the rigours of inquiry that formulate, measure and categorise. Familiar tools fail to illuminate the highways of this kingdom. A kingdom without height, breadth, depth. A kingdom infinite, not of this world, but embedded in the depths of soul. How can we know such a mystery? How can we touch the intangible? How can we prove that which cannot be captured in scientific tables? Be still, listen to the inner voice, learn to love, let compassion guide your actions, walk calmly through the midst of unknowing. The kingdom is yours. Well, that's really, I suppose, could be summed up in one very simple sentence: love God and your neighbour as yourself. Would to God that we could follow that all the time. Then moving on in the book, there are, as I say, there are a whole range of different types of poems. For many people, this has been a time of difficulty, and in some cases, real suffering, real agony. And suffering is something that's always with us. We all face it to one degree or another. And it's very difficult to explain. And I wrote a poem called You Ask Me Why. You ask me why the innocent suffer. A child dies at birth. A father remains a sole provider. A victim cries when vandals destroy his home. You ask me why, and I'm silent. Suffering stalks the land, striking whom it will with inhuman vengeance and bloody force. You ask me why, and I'm silent. I take your hand in mine as together we tread the pathway of sorrow. No words suffice at this time of anguish. In the final days of my captivity, I was kept alone for almost 5 years, but then towards the end I became very ill with a bronchial infection, and I couldn't lie down. I had to sit up with my back against the wall day and night, and there were other hostages in the room. It was the first time I'd been in touch with people for years, and it was a great disturbance to them because I was struggling for breath. And at night, when I was really feeling very desperate, one of the hostages, Terry Anderson, would just lean across and put his hand on mine. He didn't say anything. And I found that tremendously supportive at a time of real difficulty. And often, you know, when I'd been to hospitals and so on, visit people who are desperately ill, I've wondered what to say. And I realise it's not so much what you say, it's the fact you're there, the fact of another person who's caring and showing their care and solidarity with you. No words suffice at this time of anguish. We can't explain suffering, but we stand together and support each other through life. A different poem altogether. Years ago, when I was quite a young man, I lived in Africa, and Africa made a profound impression on me. It's a remarkable continent, and I lived in Uganda, not very far from Lake Victoria in Kampala, the capital. And I've written a poem about the lake, and those of you who've ever been there might catch a glimpse of Lake Victoria through this poem. It mentions a kanzu. A kanzu is a long white garment worn by men. It also mentions in this poem a basuti. Basuti is the women's dress, which I think was actually introduced by the Victorians into Africa. An early morning mist spreading like tattered cotton sheets across Lake Victoria. The silence at dawn when slowly the horizon emerges from slumber, and 1,000 colours dispel the blackness of night. The pungent odour of damp earth, earth that gave life, earth to which we shall return. A gecko motionless on a window pane, waiting to strike as Africa waits to smite the unwary. Thin wisps of smoke spiral upwards into the once black sky. A baby cries. A skeleton of a dog, eyes ablaze, scavengers, as all Africa scavengers, for life. A woman, basuti clad, sings as she walks. An old man, white kanzu, black coat, leans heavily on a gnarled stick. Now the tattered mist is no more. Now the colours have faded. Now the red dust swirls through the air as the sun pursues its merciless trek across the heavens. A new day is born as the dog scavenges and the old man leans on his gnarled stick. And there's a very simple illustration, very simple, done by a friend of mine, Jenny Coles, who's made little illustrations right through this book. Very simple pencil sketches, but they just give a certain flavour to the book. I suppose one of the things we all long for in the world is peace. And some time ago, the composer Carl Jenkins asked me if I would contribute something for his work, The Peacemakers, some libretti. And I've done that, and it was published, and the great work, The Peacemakers, which is a work for chorus and orchestra, is now performed all over the world. And it's about peace, of course, obviously, called The Peacemakers. And this is what I wrote, and this is the soprano solo in that work. Peace is a fragile meeting of two souls in harmony. Peace is an embrace that protects and heals. Peace is a reconciling of opposites. Peace is rooted in love. It lies in the heart, waiting to be nourished, blossom, and flourish until it embraces the world. May we know the harmony of peace. May we sing the harmony of peace until in the last of days we rest in peace. Well, there we are. One final one, I think. I don't want to bore you with loads of poems. You may not like poetry. But I'll just give you one last one. And it's really an epitaph. I think it's the last poem in the book. Let me remind you also, this is not just a book of poetry. There are reflections in between which I've not read. So plenty of reflections and plenty of comment about the things I've been writing on. This one is Do Not Forget Me. Do not forget me when I'm old. Do not forget that we loved with a passion that took us away from this world, lost in each other, lost in a realm where in giving we received more than we could ever hope for. Do not forget me when I have departed this life. Hold me in your heart, for we shall be together, and death will not part. Thanks for joining me today, and I very much look forward to seeing you at WOMAD next year. Bye-bye.